Hi, welcome, and thank you. My name is Jeffrey Garo. I'm a writer here at Karuna. Been here for several years and work with a lot of things, writing, sometimes strategy, and obviously also content management. We decided to have this seminar because we saw that it's a pain point for a lot of people that we work with and thought that we could perhaps be useful in sharing some thoughts about it. So I'll kick in. Content management. Why produce content? Well, there are any number of reasons why you might want to. Customer satisfaction, lead generation, sales volume, trust, cost reduction, you could name it. But we produce content for a lot of reasons, and sometimes we actually don't think about why we do these things and what's the sort of consequential process that's required to get some benefit out of it. Even a small company today, like Frokostseminar, will produce quite a lot of content on different things. They have a blog, they have a product website, they have different sales outlets, any small organization. So we're not necessarily talking about large corporations, governments. Individuals do this. Individuals have tons of information that they produce and publish every day. There's a lot of places we do it, really. You have your corporate website, you will have sponsored sites, you'll have third-party sites, offline activities, and intranet. There's content that actually goes through a lot of different places that you actually are managing. So one of the questions is, what does all this mean when every individual does this, every company does this, every organization does this, and we do it minute by minute. Even with our phones, we produce just tons of information all the time. I mean, essentially what we have is a deluge of information. There's a lot of content being produced, and it's a lot of noise sometimes. So the question is really, in a world where all this content's out there, everyone's publishing by the minute, easily, seamlessly, how is your content going to stand out? So that's really what we're after here, is to try and provide some help with that. So today we'll talk a little bit about why great content wins, why sometimes people find it difficult to do the things that deliver great content for you, and then a few pointers on how to cope with the situation. There are lots of things we can say about this, but within the space of an hour, we'll try to touch on some useful things. All right. So great content wins. Probably one of the most important things. Today, if we think about communication, branding, marketing, whatever you want to call it, there are a lot of different ways you can think about it, but ultimately what we're trying to do is build long-term relationships. We have a situation where the funnel doesn't really work anymore. You're in a situation where you're trying to build awareness, generate some kind of loyalty, and build people who will actually do the marketing for you. So coming out of that situation, content has to do a different kind of job. Content really has to be valuable to people, has to sell itself to people so that people will sell it and sell you. And really that's what you're after. If we just take one aspect of content, say for example, what appears on your corporate website, you'll find that actually content quality and relevance is the most important driver combined. This is from a survey by Bowen Craggs on web effectiveness, major corporations around the world. What they found is that if you look at between search engines and referring sites, that alone is already 60% of traffic to corporate websites. And these two sources essentially are driven by the quality and relevance of your content. So this is just one property, but you can see already content really matters. It's vital. So it all begins with great content. You create great content, essentially. You optimize it properly, in theory. People will link to you. You're prioritized, so there's a virtuous cycle here. You get social as well. People like your content, link up with you, and the whole thing builds on itself. So you get highly relevant traffic with the content you're producing, and you reach your goals. So simple cycle, but the question is how to deliver this content. Other thing to mention is urgency, another factor that comes in today. Something like, I think, half of the page views you'll get within content will come within the first week today. And within 48 hours, most of the sharing gets done. So it's not just a matter of producing great content, it has to be great content for here and now. And so that just doubles the challenge that we have. So take one example of a company that does some of this well, Siemens Answers. Siemens Answers is basically an approach that Siemens takes to humanizing itself. It's a fairly abstract company. It's involved in infrastructure and technology. And I think a lot of the sales they do are long-term, massive projects, multi-year. So it's a lot to explain. Who are we as Siemens? Build trust, and so on. So they have a campaign, Siemens Answers, which has been going on for something like 4 years now, since 2011. And what they try to do is give you a sense of who they are, what the impact is that they have as a company, make themselves more tangible and human. So Siemens Answers is cross-channel between web, mobile, social, blogs, all aspects. What they try to do is give you some sense of who they are. I'll play a little bit of this here. This is one of the videos in the Siemens Answers stories. Okay, volume. There we go. We'll just jump a little bit to the middle here. I don't want to play a lot.
På skiskolen, det helt fantastisk. Det store forskjeller, men jeg tror de har det gøy på sitt nivå. For Oslo-befolkningen så marka og skileik, det å komme seg ut på tur i helgene og bruke naturen, det en veldig viktig del av kulturtradisjonene til Oslo-folket. Gratulerer!
Jeg elsker å stå på ski.
Elsker du å stå på ski? Det var hyggelig å høre. Det gjør jeg også. Det jo litt vemodig når man må ta frem quiz-boksen, da, for det betyr jo ofte at vinteren litt på hell. En sånn her søndag og skitur, det ekte lykke for meg. Det blir ikke stort bedre enn det, altså. Heldigvis så det ikke lenge til neste vinter.
So this story here is one of something like 40 or 50 that Siemens has done. As you see, the point is that they try to explain what they do, the value they deliver, but without necessarily splattering the brand all over the place. Let's see, go forward a little bit here. So again, like I said, multiple media. Most of these stories, in fact, all the stories focus on what's behind, the story behind, the idea behind, the impact behind. Never the brand directly. So this is one approach to dealing with content. It's a lot of work, obviously, something like 50 of these videos, and at a fairly, I would say, decent budget that they're putting into it. All of these are done by independent filmmakers. So one approach to this. Another is, just talk about what they've done so far. So with this campaign over the 4 years, been able to get 43 million impressions, 3.4 million story views, something like 39,000 viewers per month, and a very high completion rate for video. 33% is quite high for video. I think you're in single digits typically. And won 6 awards. So qualitatively, quantitatively, massive success for Siemens. So just one example of some interesting things you can do with content. Another example, Coca-Cola Journey. Essentially what Coca-Cola has done is taken its homepage and turned it essentially into a magazine. It works with the magazine idiom. And what they've done in all this is put all the information that you would have from a typical corporate website in a format that you read it and you maybe get a little bit more engagement with it. The stories are not always necessarily about Coca-Cola, sometimes about other things. And they've done this, I think, now since last fall. The idea behind this is essentially that Coca-Cola maybe isn't so sure where media is going. Obviously, traditional media are to some extent fading away. You have social media, but that is increasingly dominated by maybe just a few organizations. So they're thinking, how can we get ourselves out in front of people? Because Coca-Cola is essentially a very awareness-driven company. How can we get ourselves in front of people? How can we get people to understand us, trust us, like us? And essentially, we have to almost create our own media to do it. So this is a massive effort in this case. This is something like almost 700 pages that they have today. Still producing 10 to 12, 6 to 10 on a monthly basis. 5,300 YouTube videos. They pitch this content to bloggers and to media, and sometimes they will even pay a newspaper, USA Today or something like that, to put in the content. behind all of this is a relentless performance analysis. They focus on what people respond to and write more about it. So it's not just a matter of putting out stuff we think is great, we like it. This is very, very detailed analysis that goes behind this. It's a large budget. We don't have to go through all in detail, but the point is there's a lot of people behind this. It's a large effort. It takes coordinators, editors, social media managers. At launch, they had something like 40 freelance writers. Today, they operate with about 10. So a massive effort in terms of content production. But you get the output that we just saw. And this, again, has produced great results for the company. Millions of media impressions, social media as well, and growth in traffic, both in social media and to the corporate website. And that's quite hard to do, especially in the case of Coca-Cola, because most consumer companies actually don't get great consumer traffic to their websites. They typically have to do microsites or product sites to really get people's attention directly. So this has been actually quite impressive in terms of the result it produces from content for them. So that's another example of some interesting things that people are doing with a content focus. One company, NORRONA, here in Norway, out of Valstad, I believe, they do some interesting things as well with a blog. Let's see if we can have a look here. Okay, that's not working very well. The main point is that they've got a lot of content that they produce as well. A blog, they've got a magazine, they have YouTube, Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, a lot of actually places where they put out content. Most of it is centered around their product, some around what they call brand ambassadors that they have, and sometimes just around the outdoor experience. This has had mixed results. It's a lot of content. It's actually very good quality when you look at it, you read it. It's good stuff. 65,000 likes on Facebook, which is okay. It's not great. A company like Bergens has something like, I think, 131,000. That's wrong. This should be 3,000 Twitter followers. Again, not a large number. 700 YouTube subscribers. What you find quite often is even when they have the numbers, the interaction maybe isn't quite there with the content. So if you went to Facebook, you'll see that they get sometimes a response to the content, but it's not always consistent. On the blog, it's almost no commentary. If you go to Pinterest, they don't have a lot of followers and a lot of engagement with the content. I think some of what's going on is that this is good quality content. It's interesting, but maybe it's not quite honed. The messaging across the channels isn't so clear where you're headed, in contrast to maybe a company like Siemens, which really works with strong themes across. They maybe have not quite looked and done enough analysis to what people are really focusing on and interested in connecting with. So if you were to go to, for example, Pinterest, and you looked at NORRONA's page, it's essentially just product. And that's fine, but if you then contrast it with, say, Patagonia, you'll find that what they do is a lot of things around it. They talk about environmentalism, and they collect images and around that. They'll talk about innovation and have something around that. They'll talk about the outdoor experience or winter. So it's a little more subtle. It's not as product directed. And so sometimes you can do very good content, but have it maybe too closely linked with product, and it creates a difficulty. So sometimes companies can struggle even when you're doing some interesting things. It's not so easy. There are many reasons why this happens. We should maybe talk briefly about that. One of the things that's going on, that we see at least, is if you look at traditional channels previously, there's a certain skill set that went with it. Media coverage at that point, more paid for, cost more in distribution really. Press, print ads, brochures, traditional media. Today, with digital channels, you have media is really more earned, and that comes to quality and relevancy of that content. And the distribution cost is essentially low or nothing, and the cost is actually in developing the idea, the great content. So you start to need to produce different things, video, infographics, more images, connecting with people on forums in a different language that you do in the more formal media. So many companies, I think, struggle with this mismatch of how do I actually operate in the media that really are more relevant today than they were before. So that's one challenge with content. And this goes deep within the organization. At one point, you would probably have a marketing team that connected with the external audience, and it was mostly one way, maybe some feedback coming back. Today, really what you're looking at is employees are really often people that people want to connect with. They know what's going on. They connect with people on a day-to-day basis. So there's a cultural mismatch. How do you actually start to get your company to have all these people, potential brand ambassadors for you, connect with content, good quality content on message? This is difficult because obviously you have to have management buy-in to understand that you need the resources to do this, you need the frameworks, the structure to do this. Employees may not be engaged to the degree that you need them to. This is something that becomes part of their job. They are content producers for you. Do they understand that? Are they really able to operate adeptly in the media that you need them to operate in? So a challenge there. Also, the processes and the structure we have are sometimes not really where they should be. If you look at, again, just jumping to the Boring Craig's Web Effectiveness Survey, content is a major factor in web usability on corporate websites. When they added up the different challenges that they had on the websites of the people they surveyed, something like 50% of the problems in just navigating the website were essentially due to content. Okay, interesting. That's a lot. Now, what do people do to manage content? If you went and they asked these same people what they did about managing content. So for example, if we ask, do you share best practices? Just about half of them do. Do you provide editorial guidelines for content producers? A little bit under half. Do you have an editorial steering committee? Just a quarter. Do you check the quality of the content you put out? Or does it just go out? Only a quarter do that. And then 1 in 5 do nothing whatsoever. So this is one reason why great content doesn't happen, because we don't actually have the structure to make it happen. Sometimes you have the structure and it's not really being used. One of the responses in the survey said, well, yeah, we have this oversight in our company, but really in practice, it doesn't exist. No one uses it, no one follows it. So structure, process, one reason why great content doesn't happen. Also, there's an analytical gap. Something like, I think it's half of companies that have Google Analytics don't actually understand it, don't know how to use it. They don't know what's happening with the content and where it's leading. And that gives you a difficulty in making a business case. How do you go to people and say, I need resources, I want to do this, I want to do that, this is what's going to happen, if you don't actually even know what's going on with the content? So there's a gap here again. It creates a problem making great content. So at this point we should talk maybe just about a few pointers on developing effective publishing skills. Thinking about how the great publishers do it, what they're successful at, and maybe something we can learn and embed in the way that we operate as companies, public sector, private sector, whatever you want to call it. So I think essentially you should think about, when you think about content, you should steal with pride from great publishers. You should think about mission and focus, measurement, as we've just been talking about, the organization and process around what you do. You're not going to necessarily match what a publisher does because all they do is produce content, but you should understand how they're organized and what makes it work and what makes it great. Culture and skills. You also need to understand how to develop culture and skill around communication and content development, because that now has to permeate the organization, and it's not just about the marketing people or the content people. So we like to use this model in terms of talking about content and many of our processes actually. If you think about managing content effectively, there are two sets of things you need to do. One is the strategy, to figure out what's the right content to focus on. And then the second set of things is about execution and optimization. How do you produce this great content you want to produce effectively? So first, we could just talk a little bit about the strategy. How do you actually figure out what's the right content to produce and get it, structured and out? Content really, most important thing about content, if you're thinking about a publisher, is content has to be relevant to three basic things. It's a user's needs. What is the user after? What are they trying to do? What's valuable to them? What is your mission as an organization? What is your intent, and what do you intend to do, whether that's make money, serve the public? What is it you need to do? And then last but not least, where are you most credible? There will be a number of things you're trying to do, but you do have to focus. And in the same vein, your content also has to be focused. You may not be necessarily credible and the best person to provide content for all the things that you're after. So you do have to understand where you need to hone in on. And that discipline is what makes publishers survive, essentially. Either you're able to match this or you can't be in business. So, I mean, if you take just a few magazines, Plot magazine, for example, Se og Hør, Natt og Dag. Looking at Plot, essentially, they've said there are people who want their brain sort of, not entertained, but sort of worked a little bit. In-depth content, long stories, maybe things that the newspaper touched on and left, and they want to get a bit more into depth in it. So hers is basically light reading, celebrity oriented, don't make me think too much, just, keep me entertained. Maybe I want to know about TV. Not a dog. I'm young, I'm into culture, I want to go out, what's happening, And if the magazine doesn't understand what its audience is about, where it's credible, it will fail. And essentially, for us, it's the same thing. We have to think very carefully about what are we really, really going to focus on from a content point of view. So there's some analysis necessary to build a content strategy, this first bit. And there are really several buckets which go into it. One is obviously, what's your business strategy? What are you focused on as an organization? What's your mission? The other is brand strategy. You have a brand strategy, or at least you should. What does that say, and what does it imply for content that you're going to produce? Obviously, you have to be guided with this. The audience, what are they after? What are their habits? What are they interested in? What do they do? What's influencing them? You do need to understand this to produce content that is great and relevant. Competition. I say competition from an informational point of view or transactional point of view, or whatever it is that the content you're doing is. Who is providing the same kind of content or content that's aimed at doing the same thing that your content is? Where are they going? Who's good at it? Who's not? You need to understand that as well. Priorities. Out of all this, you have to somehow narrow down to a set of things that you want to do, focus on, and provide great content for. And last but not least, you have to have targets. You have to say, we're going to produce such and such content in such and such places. We think it will produce such and such results. And this is maybe some of the metrics and drivers that will be behind it. So all in all, in that first part, the strategy, you have to come to some clear understanding of why you're producing content at all, when, where, roughly what's the frameworks in which you're going to do it, to be able to do it effectively and produce the right content. So again, publishers do this very rigorously, and we need to really focus on that. So some examples of some of the things that come out of this process. You will have things like personas. If people are writing for you, whether that's on the web, they're doing tweets, they're on Facebook, you do need to, across all your content, and sometimes specifically to each medium, come up with personas. Who are the people that you deal with? What are they interested in? What are they doing? Because everybody that writes has to have this person or people in the back of their mind in order to produce content that really works for those people. Things like tone of voice and style guides. We know they exist, but does everybody across the organization have them? Do they use them? This is for text specifically, but you'll need to have this, for example, for images. People are used to, for example, sometimes having a brand guide in which we say our photographs will be of this style. Do you have that for the average person? Not your designers, but the average person who's going to produce content, put out images. Do you have that for video, for example? If your people are maybe trying to do infographics, do they understand what your style is that you would use? You need to have this as well. Sometimes people don't really think about content in terms of crisis management. You think at the PR level, what's somebody going to go out and say in the press, but you're essentially a content provider. It's a service now that you provide 24 hours a day. What happens to your content when something happens that's a general crisis, for example, a crisis specific to you, a crisis that's mild? You have to understand, am I going to take down all the content, for example? Am I going to change the tone that I talk in? Am I going to stop campaigns? Which ones? You have to have some sense, which means you need to build some scenarios about what might happen and what do you do. And I'll show you an example of a company maybe hasn't really thought about it. This was W.H. Smith in the UK, and just this week they had a sort of scandal. W.H. Smith basically has an ebook reader, Kobo, and it was discovered early this week that some self-publishers can actually publish porn, which is not within the guidelines, but they can. And this affected W.H. Smith, affected Amazon, a couple of companies. But this is what they did, at least. So if you go to their Twitter now, they have something like 8 tweets, all basically sort of prostrating themselves over the matter. If you go to their website, you basically have, let's see if I can pull this up correctly. If you go to their website, okay, I don't have it right now, but if you go to their website, at least as of yesterday night, it was down, and they just had basically one long apology letter. Not a very easy one to read either, so it wasn't even designed for web. It's just a long letter. And that's an awful thing to do because people rely on you for content. And was this really a crisis that you needed to stop providing that content? Absolutely. Probably not, because Amazon's still up. Yeah. So something to think about as well. So you need to have some frameworks, some structure that are going to help you in guiding you towards great content. We should talk a bit more now about execution and optimization. What this is about is having understood what kind of content you're after, you need to produce it. You'll have execution and optimization teams. And for example, your website, you have a team around that. So that's one example of that. You might have that around Twitter or Facebook or anything else. And then on top of that, you will have obviously campaigns or communication campaigns. So it's not just all about channels, but also about the layers and activities that you come out with. You need to understand how you're going to work with these activities to do them efficiently. Again, it's important to think that there's quite a range of a footprint that you have. If you think about it, you have owned content, your corporate website, you may have a product website, blog, employee blog. You have an intranet, which people often forget about in terms of content because you need some consistency. Sponsored media, earned media, and sometimes media that you essentially buy. Yeah? So you're working with all of these initiatives across all of these properties. How do you get that together? What's often missing for many companies is a kind of a newsroom mentality. You forget that you're doing quite a lot of things in a lot of places and that it needs to fit together. Today we have complete transparency. The person who sees one thing sees the next property. They're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, they're on your website. The people who look at your intranet also communicate outside. Do you have the right messaging for them? Is there consistency in the timing, in the actual messaging itself? So you need a newsroom mentality to be able to understand and work together. And this is difficult because essentially in most companies, content is something that's done by everybody. It's rare that companies actually have a content manager. And even if they do, that content management may not have control over everything. But really, you need to. You need to have somebody who's getting everybody working together on the same page. If we look at what a magazine or a newspaper might look like, they have a structure which is designed to provide some rigor in what they do. You have an editorial board which operates essentially at a strategic level. This is about content strategy definition, the things we talked about earlier on. It's also about budgeting and resources. They provide the actual tools you use to do what you need to do. You have a managing editor which has contact with the editorial board, but manages the day-to-day, coordinates the day-to-day. So they're the link between the strategy and the execution. And that's really your content manager in a company, who should have really much more influence and strength, capability in the organization than they do today. Manager also is responsible for assessing performance. You just have to do that. It's not really an option or question mark. Then you have things like section editors. In a newspaper, that might be culture or politics, whatever. In our context, it's probably around the properties like web or Facebook or Twitter, or a specific campaign you have, a product launch, there's content coming around that. So you have these initiatives that come out, and those people are more about execution of specific things. And then you have content producers, who are basically people who will deliver the content for you. They know the material the most. They produce content. They produce ideas. So within an organization, really to produce great content and effective content, you need to understand who has the information, the resources, the organizational power at all these levels. And you need to fit people into these roles. Sometimes people may be the same. A content producer may also be their own editor or an editor of an area. They may actually also be the managing editor. In other words, a content manager may also be a person who's producing content. But you need to understand the role that you're playing at each point. You take off a hat. Okay, now I'm no longer a writer. Now I have to think about management. You have to understand what you're doing and what your roles are. And sometimes these roles may be fulfilled by different people. You may have 3 people who together manage day-to-day content management. You have to think about that as well. It's not just a matter of, oh, I don't have what the magazine has, but you have to think about the roles. You need to have things like content workflows, discipline. We talked earlier about something like 1 in 5 companies not reviewing content. You have to have a structure that says, this is what happens. I produce content. Do I need prior review? For example, I'm tweeting. No, I'm not going to go and ask people, can I tweet this? You tweet. So you publish. That's something maybe you check after. Okay, fine. Do I need a review? Yeah, I probably need a review. Can I do it from my peer as opposed to an editor? Probably you can do that. And if the peers say, you know, this really isn't saying the right thing, this isn't accurate, you got to come back and redo it. Assuming you get through that, you go to an editor, for example. Is this really relevant to the bigger framework of what we're trying to do? Is this the right time to come out with the content? You know, so you have to think about the rules and workflows and provide those for people as well to work with. So just some understanding of how we're all working together and what's a framework. Things like editorial calendars, people forget that really most proper publishers have a sense of over time, what are they aiming to do? What are external events going on? What's happening? If you take just any old magazine, this is Cooperative Grocer, and they will have a plan over, January to February. These are the editions they have coming out. What's happening? What are the actual things they're going to write about and talk about? And all of this is driven by two things. One is what's their intent as an organization, but two is also what's happening out there in the world. So you have to have a sense of what are the events that are going to affect your content production, product releases, messe, whatever it is, but you have to have a sense of what's happening that I need to be a content producer around, because relevancy is driven obviously by that. At the same time, again, there are a lot of properties you're going after, and a lot of properties you're doing this across, so it's even more important that you have a sense of, over time, over all these properties, how is content going to fit together? When something appears in one place, does it appear in another, and in what form? Is it going to appear in the same way? Is it going to be just supporting and not really deep? You have to really understand what you're trying to do all across these things with that calendar. Still, nonetheless, we have this framework, but it's important to remember to be agile and relevant. Sure, you have an editorial calendar, but things happen. And if you want to think like a publisher, you have to react to the moment to be relevant. So just one example of Dunkin' Donuts, which during the Super Bowl in the US this year, they had something like a 30-minute power outage. And they were able to produce in that time tweet out a commercial, which was really probably even talked about more than the Super Bowl. So being able to respond quickly is important, and you shouldn't forget that, although we're talking about structure and process and so on. But if you're going to be relevant, then you have to be able to actually act here and now. Also important to cultivate communication as a basic skill within the organization. If we think about the publisher model, you also have to think that the marketing team, the communication team, as well as the organization, has to really take on a journalistic mentality. They have to be adept at communicating. They have to be looking for stories. Quite often, the content that people are looking for that's effective and great is the story behind. It's the story inside. It's the thought of the person who really has insight. So you have to now be able to be the person or the person or people who understands this company more than anyone else and is able to write and provide great stories about it. So communication and journalistic culture has to come out as something that you do. So this involves things like, obviously, training. You need to train people in to write. Okay, we know that. But also things like platforms. How are people going to actually exercise these muscles? Do you have, for example, internal blogging that allows people to maybe operate in a context where it's not exposed yet, and then they can sort of figure out how to write well and what do I really like to write about? And these things also act in a way as habit formers and a way of providing a talent hunt for you. You can find out who within your organization does these things well and how can they be maybe cultivated as an external content producer. It's also good for them as well to be able to develop their skills. So I'll give you one example here. And this is from ABB'S. This is something that they've put out in the last year. What they do is they have something called MYBETTERWORLD beta. And they basically encourage people within the company to come out with stories about what they're doing, explain how it fits into the framework of producing a better world, which is ABB's sort of corporate theme. And with the best stories from this, they will now be able to go out and develop a campaign about producing a better world. So just one example of developing frameworks or platforms to do this. Now, we don't necessarily all have to do it at this scale, but it's important to think about creating internal frameworks that can help you then externally. Do you have a question? We should also talk about measurement. I touched on this earlier. Measurement is important because it's about drawing lines to really your ultimate objectives. We've talked earlier about things like, for example, customer satisfaction or lead generation, sales volume. There are a number of things you could be wanting to do. But when you deal with metrics, number one, you have to deal with metrics, but number two, you have to understand what are you after and what is actually the linkages between the different metrics that are available to you and the outcomes that you're trying to deliver. So let's think about KPIs. KPIs then should be aligned with business strategy. They should be clear and actionable. They don't have to be mysterious or mystical. They just have to be things you understand and are practical. And sometimes the less the better, to be able to be more actionable and usable in the limited time you have. So measurement to support your strategy, and I'll just give you some example. We talked about the different objectives you might have, like we said, customer satisfaction or loyalty, sales. So we'll take one example here. Traffic metrics essentially are things that happen with activity, number of people or something. Drivers will be things that go on within these activities, and KPIs are organizational objectives that you have that you're trying to do. So if we said, for example, that I'm trying to achieve high customer loyalty or customer satisfaction, for example, what would I be thinking about from a metric point of view? I think, okay, well, website visits, a basic metric, okay, fairly usable. Because of website visits, I've put in content which is about informational support. So do people visit that page to begin with? The next step, okay, on that support page, which has content about what people are trying to fix or understand, maybe I have a form that says, step by step, here's what you do, here's what you do, here's what you do. Do people get through that form? And if so, at the end of it, do they say, yes, my problem was solved? Okay, so you have metrics on, do people come? What actually happened? What did they do? Out of that, you should be able to then measure, for example, customer satisfaction. You will have external measures. These may not be necessarily directly in your web property, but you'll have some measures of customer satisfaction. In theory, there should be a link between the things you are doing with this content and your customer satisfaction rate, and that seems like a reasonable assumption. And further then, customer retention rate. Presumably the reason you're trying to satisfy customers is you want to keep them. So this is just one example of taking a logical process through about what are you trying to do with content and are you actually achieving it. And so you can repeat this for any other thing, sales volume, market share, and so on. But this is just one exercise. But the point is, all of the content has to be in some way measured in this logical flow and process. So, for example, people think that it's difficult. Really, it's quite easy to build dashboards. This is for Karina, for example. But, question mark will be, what are the pages that people are visiting? Which ones are they not, maybe? And sometimes maybe you don't necessarily have a volume goal for a page, but it's there because it's important and some specific reason, fine. But you should understand what's going on with the page. And once you start to look at things like these metrics, then you have to think about how you're going to respond to the challenges which show up. Presumably you analyze the data, you have some sense of page views, actions, maybe people who just bounced because they weren't interested or it wasn't right for them. You come up with some ideas for improvement. The metrics are just really raw materials for your ideas. You should be able to say, okay, well, those 5 pages aren't being visited, and you should be able to look at them qualitatively, operationally, and think about why. You should be able to figure out what things you want to do with those pages. Do you want to remove them? Do you want to fix them? How would you fix them? Do you want to maybe try a different approach to the page? So things like A/B testing come in. Can you do a web page in 2 different formats and post them and see which ones actually people respond to, then drop the other. So there's a cycle once you get into measurement about looking at data, coming up with a theory, figuring out a change that should fix it, and then seeing what happens. And sometimes this is not always about problems, sometimes it's just about opportunities. You might think within the business context, I have an opportunity to do something better. You go out, you do the process, and you test it. So point is, with content, it's important not to just think, okay, I've done it, I leave it. It lives a short life in some ways. Relevance is very time sensitive. So you really have to be constantly looking at performance and tweaking and come up with ideas. So this is actually in some ways fun stuff. It's a lot of numbers and so on, but it is actually very interesting and obviously tremendously useful in terms of producing content. And that allows you to do things, for example, when you've come up with your theories, you've done your testing, to look at responses. For example, in Google Analytics, you're able to look at in real time what is happening. Where are people looking at a page? And which of the pages are most visited, for example. All this allows you to essentially prioritize, which if we came back to what we were talking about initially, you're a publisher and you need focus. And so at the end of the day, you need to understand what's working, what really is my biggest interest and the user's biggest interest, and am I focusing on that? So if we thought about content from a quality and relevance point of view, if we assume that, okay, we're doing all the things that are right to produce the right quality, at some point you have to take a stance on the relevance to your mission and to the user's interest. And if we for a minute forget about things that are of low relevance, you don't want to be doing those. The difficult thing is when things are highly relevant but maybe not working so well, what do I do? If it's working great, well, obviously we keep it going. If it's not, you have to think, okay, I've got to go through that process of analysis, measurement, coming up with ideas, hypotheses to fix. So it's important to think of your content in this way and to not forget the discipline of just getting rid of things. Everybody always has their, content that they love. You think it's great, it's fantastic. But, you have to ask yourself sometimes, is this the right content for here? If I go back to that example of NORRONA, for example, I would say that, quite often they have some content that's well produced, interesting to some people, but maybe that's not what they should be doing. Maybe there are other things they should be doing and focusing on. And you have to have that sense of discipline around measurement. It's not just about putting content out and saying, okay, that was great, now we move on. So some of this sometimes is daunting to people because content management is a natural thing in some organizations. In others, it's not. In others, it's something that's done on the side or maybe not at all. So when people maybe don't have the habit and the culture of doing it, I think it's important to think that, okay, it doesn't have to be a big scale issue. You're really looking at just some simple things. You can create a formal content strategy, great. You can have something simple to guide you. That may be good enough as a starting point. But whatever it is, you have to have some sense of what's my mission. And that has to be a driver for content. Then comes things like quality and quantity. Do I have the right things? Am I producing content about the right things? And is it in the right volume? Sometimes I say the right things, but maybe I don't give people enough information. Where do I carry on? And again, the discipline of where to stop. All of this doesn't have to be big scale. Really, the lean approach is always best. If you think you have a lot of content and it's challenging to start and all over the whole thing, maybe there's a place that you think you can get a lot of benefit, or you can test and play quietly. Why not do it there? Why not start somewhere small and see what happens? And last but not least, then this becomes a foundation for actually developing this publishing rigor across your entire organization and on a larger scale. So just to reiterate again what we were saying, we think that great content wins, that you really can think like a publisher to succeed. It is really a lot of good things that you can think about and use. And last but not least, it's easy to begin. So there are a lot of different ways in which you can get yourself going, get a lot of benefit very quickly. In fact, much of the benefit is done by some of the simplest things you can think of. So there we have it. I'll open up for questions now, or just commentary. Thank you.